Alrighty, welcome back. And before we get started, you might have noticed if you click play and jump around, do with our test, we don't have a player character. This isn't a character, it's just a camera moving around. So we might want to do something about that. So let's go ahead and press Control Space, open up our content browser, and we're going to learn about adding and importing and all that other super fun stuff. So if we go to our all folder here, content folder, and if we click add feature or content pack, so add here, add feature or content pack, we click here, and let's go ahead and let's grab our first person for this platformer. We could do a third person in the future, but for now, let's just stick with first person so we don't have to worry about animations or anything like that. Let's go ahead and click add to project. It might take a second. That's totally fine, and it's going to add some additional folders. That's also totally fine. Don't worry about it. To fix this, let's go ahead and check out our project settings. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this content browser for now. And let's go ahead and go to edit, project settings. Again, this is going to be a little bit complicated, but don't worry about it. It's really not. On the left-hand side, we're going to go to maps and modes. And instead of game mode base. Now, mind you, when we imported the completely blank project, there is no game mode, right? So there wasn't anything really created. There's no player controls or anything like that. So what we did is we took the content from the first person template and then we brought it over into our new project. Two reasons why I did that. I wanted to get you a little bit more comfortable with pulling in content because that's something pretty big for Unreal Engine. But then also I wanted to kind of give you just an absolutely blank slate and what the editor would look like without getting too confused with everything else. So now that we're back in our project settings, go ahead and click this drop down, and we're going to do GM, game mode. You guessed it. Good job. First person. So let's go ahead and click Control S. We can X this out. We can back up. We can press play. And if you notice, you have legs and arms and a body. And you could run and you can jump by pressing the space bar, and you can kind of hop around your little obstacle course that you made and get stuck and hop off and yeet yourself off the edge if you'd like. Now that we have everything kind of hooked up and we're able to run around, jump, and have fun, let's start diving into the fundamentals and core principles of programming and what that looks like in visual scripting and blueprints. So let's go ahead and press Control Space again. And what we need to do is find our player. So if we go into first person, we can go into blueprints. And if you want, you don't have to do it from that screen. You can do it on the side. And we can go ahead and go to our first person character. Double click and open them up. This might look a little overwhelming. Don't worry about it because we're not touching it. This has to do with, well, really quick, I could explain it actually. But this has to do with when we launch, our character is possessed. And mind you, this template is set up to handle both like phone, controller, and PC. So a lot of these controls you'll kind of see a mix of that. So our camera input, our aims, and which direction we're looking, movement. Same thing with jump. So we don't really have to worry about our jump function because they added that in there. Woohoo! But let's go ahead and get started with some variables. So I'm going to use comments to kind of break down the different variable types. In order to add a variable, which is really cool, actually really quick, we're going to close these out. So you can middle mouse click if you'd like, or you can just hit the little X. That's fine. Nice and clean. And if you're curious, let's just go to the viewport and you can see our character setup. There are two meshes here that has something to do with their template, but it's fine. So if you go back to event graph here, in order to add a variable, you could kind of come down here to variable section and we can press the plus. Now for now, I'm just going to go ahead and click this and not worry about what the name is just yet and focus more so on this right-hand side. This is going to determine what our variable type is. Now, if this is too small for you, because we have this selected, you could come over to the right side and check it out here. So if we click this drop down, we have all of our variable types available right for us. So essentially, I mean, and there's massive additions to it too, because you could go to object types and all this super fun stuff, and that gets really complicated. But for now, what we're going to do is just kind of focus on what these are. And let's kick it off with Boolean. So let's call this Boolean is alive, right? So this will be for our little game here. And see, hey, is our character still alive? Did I die from a trap? Did I fall off the edge of the map? What happened, right? So Once we have our name, we have our Boolean, we could press compile. And if you notice, there's not a default value. And this is why we're pressing compile, because we have to actually tell, hey, compile, and now we have our options. So let's go ahead and do a comment here and comment this out. A Boolean is going to be either a true or false typing, oh my goodness, value. So a Boolean is a yes or a no, a true or a false. It cannot be anything else. That is what it is. There's two things that we could do here with variables is essentially a get or a set. So if I want to get, I can click and drag out here and I can press the get button. Alternatively, you can hold down the control key. That is also a get. A get is essentially just grabbing whatever the current value is. So if it is true, click, then this will return true. If this is false, then it'll return false. Alternatively, I could click and drag and do set. Again, I can click and hold down Alt and drag for a set. What this is going to do, let me just delete the second one because it doesn't matter, is whatever code I run, if I want to, I could have this on begin play just for testing purposes. And we could have this set to true or false. Pretty simple. And we're actually going to set up some debugging here in a second, but let's really quick just define what that variable is. So a variable essentially is a piece of code that stores information, right? Pretty easy to understand, and that gets a little bit more complex the further along we go, but don't worry about it. So let's go ahead and set up a debug really quick so that way we could print out what we're looking for per variable, right? So let's go ahead and I think for now, I'm just going to move the comments like this. Boolean is true or false value. Let's go ahead and remove begin play. Let's right click and we're going to type in keyboard events. And what this is going to do is kind of narrow down which keyboard we can press. And the reason why I typed it in is like, let's say I wanted the D key or the E key, right, for debug. If I just type in E, it's going to pull up every single letter E that it has. That's not exactly what I'm looking for. So if I type in keyboard events, this is how I get the actual key that I'm looking for. I could scroll up as soon as I find E. Perfect. So now when I press E, what I can do is I can go ahead and print to the console what the value is of, oops, there we go. Why am I doing that? There we go. It's going to convert it to a string. We're going to cover what a string is in a second, but it's going to print the value of what that Boolean is. So let's go ahead and test that out. So I hit play. Oh, we can remove those tests from the other one. But if I press the E key, it'll tell me that by default, it is false. Let's go ahead and move this. And if you want to, just go to your content browser, open up your test object, and then hold Alt and disable that. So now when we press play, it doesn't pop up. And now we can just press E and what the value is, right? So that's an example of getting the value and then displaying it to the console when we press our debug button, right? So let's move this to the side. So now our default value that we know is false. Let's go ahead and set this to true, and then we're going to print the value of that Boolean, right? Compile, save, press play, and now when we press the E key, we get true. So let's go ahead and clean this up just a little bit because we're going to be done with our debug. So let's go ahead and hold Alt, break our debug here. Let's go ahead and hold Alt, and let's organize this. Delete. Awesome. So now we have our Boolean set and a get, and we'll move on to the next one. So let's go ahead and create another variable, and we can leave the name alone for now. Don't worry about it. But I want to explain the difference between a few things before we get into it, right? You'll notice here that we have a byte, and if you hover over it, it'll give you a little bit more information. If you want to, you get really curious, you can hold down Control and Alt, and it'll expand some information. So if you're ever wondering what things are, let's take a look at the tooltips. A byte uses 8 bits and represents a whole number between 0 and 255. And let's go ahead and take a look at integer. Integer is a whole number that cannot have a fractional part. Examples would be 2, -6, 1045. So essentially what we're looking at is a byte is going to be a little bit more of a resourceful number, but the catch is it has to be between 0 and 255. Typically, what you're going to look to do is have an integer. So for this example, let's go ahead and create an integer, and let's name this lives, right? Because we have games where you have a certain amount of lives, and when you lose all of them, then it's game over. So again, in order to have the default value show up, we're going to hit compile and save, and we're going to explain what this is in a second. So the default value for our lives, let's go ahead and do 3. 3 sounds like a good test for our platformer here, or whatever it may be. So let's go ahead and press C for a comment, and we're going to go ahead and explain an integer we'll just say it's a round number, no decimals. An integer is a number that has to be rounded with no decimals, and that's essentially what an integer is. Pretty common in, like, if we look at things like currency or anything like that, we'll most likely use integers. Actually, let's just create a second variable anyway, and we'll call this currency collected, right? And we'll just call that for now. So now we have 2 integers. Woohoo! So again, we have our debug here. Let's go ahead and do our get, and then hold down Alt, and we could do, wrong one, our lives. Hold down Alt, and let's just kind of keep this consistent. And as we're learning, nice and clean. Awesome. And just to debug, if you would like, you could go ahead and, another fun thing you could do, you could click and drag lives, for instance, and plug it directly into an output. And what this is going to do is just plug in whatever value that we have there. So we can press compile, save, play, press the E key. We have 3 lives. Easy. So something cool about integers that we could do, so this is not a decimal point or a float, which we'll cover in a second, is we can increment or decrement the value of what lives is, right? So I already gave you an example of setting. We're not going to do that, but let's go ahead and move this over to the side. And we're going to go ahead and Control C, Control V, copy this. And I'm going to grab this node, pull out, and I'm going to do a plus plus, an increment, right? So what I'm going to do here is plug this in. And what the plus plus is doing is it's essentially, actually, we could just do this instead. Perfect. What it's doing is it's taking the value of lives, which is 3, and a plus plus is adding 1 and assigning that new value to that variable. So if this was 4, and I do a plus plus, the new value is 5, and then I'm getting that value and printing it. So in this case, our result should be 4. Ta-da! Pretty simple. Now the same thing happens if I decrement, minus minus, and let's go ahead and plug these in here. Let's move this over here, and we'll bring that up nice and tidy. Perfect. Compile, save, and now we should have 2. Awesome. Now, if you don't want to, like, this only works for adding or subtracting 1, right? That's the kind of the value that we're going to do. So let's go ahead and delete this and delete this. And what we could do with integers, which we can't do with Booleans, is we can add and subtract and multiply. So we have our operators here. So you could do our plus sign, and we'll just go ahead and pull this out here. We could do our minus sign, right? Actually, let's just keep these plugged in. Why not? Then we could also do our multiplication. And we could also do our division. And these are kind of the options that we have here for an integer that we don't have for Boolean and a lot of other variable types. All right, so let's go ahead and clean this up. We're going to go ahead and move our debugging to the other side. We're going to add this here because this is a little bit different. I can actually delete this, and let's make it nice and clean. Perfect. So now we kind of have an example of what we could do with our integers. I mean, if you want more practice, please, 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 please challenge yourselves and grab, some of these. You could Control C, you could do -2 from our lives, and we could do a set, right? Because we need to set the return value to what that is. And we could print that. Actually, we might not even need to set. We could just set that a value here, just have it print whatever that is. Yeah, that'll be cleaner. So if you want to go ahead and practice this and do some subtraction, multiplication, whatever you want to do, and change this value and have fun with it. You could also change the default value if you'd like to whatever number you want it to be, and just kind of play around and get comfortable with it. Alrighty, let's go ahead and keep going down the list here. We're going to hit plus, and we're going to do, again, don't name it just yet. Let's go ahead and take a look. We're going to do a float. So a float is essentially, just for layman's terms, an integer that can have a decimal. So if you're going to do anything with decimals and percentages, then I would recommend using a float. So a good example of these in games would be health. If you're doing anything with health, stamina, magic, anything that has to do with that, like damage, I would do a float. Just in case any type of math that you might do, like even though if you're doing, I'm just going to do 10 damage. That's fine. But when you get into stuff where you have like, okay, well now I have damage mitigation, or maybe like somebody blocked and it has reduced damage, then you kind of get into that divisiveness and float and multiplication. So float would be your option here. So we're going to go ahead and do a float, and we're going to call this player health. We might not actually use player health in this little mini game. That's okay. We're going to do it anyway. So what I'm going to do is do another comment, and we're going to call this a float, and we're going to be a decimal number. Keep it simple. For our player health, since we did hit compile and save, let's go ahead and do a default value of 100, right? Because that makes sense. We're super healthy. Nobody's been fighting us yet. And let's go ahead and move that there. Move this down here for our debug. Perfect. Let's go ahead and do our get and our set, just to kind of make it consistent with what we've been doing here. And just to let you know, these actually have the same options as an integer. So if I plug these in here, I have so many cool different options that I can do. And then I can just print them to the console. So very similar to integers. I highly recommend you just kind of play around with these. Let's go ahead and grab player health, and we'll do a divide. And let's go ahead and move this here. I'll go ahead and press Q. Let's do a divide, and let's just divide it by, like, I don't know, 65 and see what happens. I'm just picking a random number. Oops. Play. You can see our our float there. So if you think our decimal number, float equals decimal number, a little bit easier to remember. So same thing, and it doesn't mean that it has to be a decimal number, right? So if my health is 100 and I decided to go ahead, Control V, and I just wanted to subtract 10 from it, that's totally fine. And if I click play, I still get 90. So you can notice the 0.0 at the end there, but it could still be a rounded solid number. That's totally fine. Float just has that flexibility. The main thing really about like integers and floats is kind of just like when you start optimizing things and getting into super big projects, that kind of goes a long way. So working on an MMO, you kind of have to be a little bit more careful with like transferring information over servers and being conscious of like what you're going to put forth to the player. So if I have 50 levels, for instance, or 30 levels, or anything below 100 essentially, and I'm keeping a float or an integer to store the information for levels, I might be better off with that byte instead of an integer. That's assuming that I can still do all the calculations that I need to with that. But that's just an example. So cool. That's a float. And just as a heads up, we are going to kind of just brush over a few of these depending on what they are. So let's go ahead and go to variables here. Excuse me. And we'll go ahead and check out the next thing. So the next three are going to be a little bit different. We've got name, string, and text, right? So the best way that I could describe this is a name is going to be used for identification purposes. The name isn't really going to change that much, and just to let you guys give up, this is case sensitive. So if I am looking for an item, right, and I'm like iron dagger, and I don't put a space between my search, but the item has a space, it's not going to find it. If I do iron dagger, like D is lowercase on one instance, but it's capitalized on the other, that's another instance where that's not really going to work. So that's something that you have to kind of keep in mind when checking these out. So yeah, names for identification purposes, kind of case sensitive. Um, Actually, let's go ahead and add that. Oh, it's new. Okay, so we'll call this player name, and we're going to go ahead and change this to name. And what we could do is you could go ahead and name yourself. I like Steve. Let's call this character Steve. You can name him something funny if you'd like. I don't care. I actually prefer funny. So if you have a funny name that you would like to name your character, drop it in the comments because I will laugh at it. I am very easily amused. It's one of my downfalls. That's okay. Let's go ahead and add another variable here, and we could go ahead and check out our string. So the string's a little bit different. It's actually more versatile than a name and text. So string could be appended, it could be adjusted, and if you notice that the text of it is actually very similar to what we've been using in our print string. And if you remember or have at least noticed that every time we plug something in, this information can be converted, this is what this node is doing, into a string so that way we could display it to a console and print it out. So that's what's really cool about strings is they're super versatile. So let's go ahead and do another comment, and we'll do string versatile text can be appended and converted for debugging. And that's kind of what we're going to be using strings for. We don't really need a string variable, to be honest. So we're going to not really keep one here. But what we can do is just kind of move this down to text here. Let's go ahead and press Control Save and kind of explain that. So text is going to, at least in Unreal Engine, use to kind of pull information from the player and put it to the UI. So good example is like our currency collected, right? So if we want our currency collected to be displayed to the UI, typically the UI is going to display the text of the number. Does that make sense? Because it actually needs to be in writing and not actually coded to be a number. So I can't just display the number two, but I can display the text that says number two, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what our text is. So text would be mostly used for UI to display numerical, or we'll do in parentheses, or other information. When we get to simplistic UI and other projects that we do on this channel, you'll see text used a lot more than we would anywhere else. So again, we don't really need that for now. That's okay. And we're not really going to be debugging that too much. But what we could do here, actually, just for consistency's sake, let's do a test string, and let's just be consistent. Why not? Test. Actually, we'll call this test string test. Isn't that a theory? String test theory? String theory, that's what it is. We'll call it string theory. How about that? All right, so let's get string theory. Nobody does. It's fine. And set string theory, which I don't think you could do. I think our universe might implode if we do that, which is fine. Probably did in 2012 anyway. So let's go ahead and do another variable here, and let's do a test. What's the other thing we're missing? Text. Awesome. Don't say that 5 times fast. So we'll do, what do we call this? Test. Text. Perfect. Compile and save. And then we'll go ahead and, oh, my bad. Let's move these down here. Good catch. You're probably yelling at me to do that. That's fine. Set that to text, compile and save. Hold down Alt, hold down Control. Hopefully this is just practice too to get you more used to what this viewport is doing and what we're doing here, right? And again, if you want to, please feel free to test these out. Go ahead and plug in your debug, right? Get some more practice and go ahead and put these out to the console and see what happens. So let's go ahead and grab this player name, and then we can move on to the next variables. All right, I promise we are almost there, y'all. Don't worry about it. So let's go ahead and add another variable. Again, not worrying about the name just yet. And let's go ahead and select the type, and we're going to go down to a vector. So a vector is going to essentially be vector, our location in 3D space. This is just an example of what it is. So easiest to understand essentially. So what a vector can be is the location you want to go to in 3D space, what you need to move to, what you were in 3D space, but essentially it's a location in 3D space. I just did our location, so that way if you do, whoops, our start, wherever we just started has a location in 3D space. So if I click player start and I look at location, negative 770, negative 820, 92, whatever, that's essentially going to be our vector. If you're working in 2D space, you're only going to have two of those inputs because it's a vector 2D and not a vector 3D. In Unity, you'll see that difference, but in Unreal Engine, because we are traditionally a 3D engine, you're just going to see vector. Now, there is a way to get the vector 2D space, and that's totally fine. But let's go ahead and work with this for now. So we'll call this player, player location. Compile and save. And we'll go ahead and do our alt and our control for our get and our set and our get. If you would like to debug it, you totally can. But what you could do, which is pretty cool, is this one's going to be a little bit more tricky, but it's okay. We're going to practice together. When we press E, I want to get our current player location and then store that information into our set. So what I could do is I could right click and I could say get vector, hold on, get location. Our target is ourself. And if you notice, the pin is the same color. And we could go ahead and set that to this, plug this in here, and we could go ahead and convert that to a string and print it to the console. So now it tells me exactly where I'm located, and if I move, it'll give me different numbers. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does, because I don't know of another way to explain it. That's okay. So let's go ahead and reset this and set it up how we had it before. But yes, that is a vector. Alrighty. Cool. Next thing we're going to take a look at, is a rotator. Essentially, these next three things are going to be, if I look at the details panel, our location, rotation, and scale. So actually, that's a good thing to put here. We'll call this translate. If I can spell, what is that? Let's try that again. Awesome. So let's go ahead and set this to rotator, and I'll say this is player rotation. And we could do the same thing here. If you would like to debug it, go for it. If not, that's okay, because if you're grabbing the concept, I'd rather you just get that. But if you want the practice in the engine, go for it. We'll call this a rotator. Our rotation in 3D space. And then we'll kind of name it what it looks like in the details panel, right? And then same thing, Alt, Control, perfect. And we're going to clean this up and then just kind of call it variables if you like. And then our last variable that we're going to focus on is our transform. So the transform is going to essentially be actually all of these, our rotation, our scale, and our location. So let's actually just call that transform. Actually, a better example of that would be, sorry, I'm trying to give you the best information that I can. Yeah, it's all three. So if you look at the default value, location, rotation, and scale. So let's just call that location. Oh my goodness. Location, rotation, and scale. So again, if you want to debug it, you can. You could just get player transform And it's all color coordinated too. So if you need to, like if you pull a pin somewhere and you're like, oh, what type of variable is that? You can hover over it and it'll tell you, just in case you're wondering what it is. So yeah, that is variables. I understand that was a lot. That was very hectic, but these are the primary variables that we'll be using. Less so the bottom ones here, and that's okay. But I do want to cover just one more thing. I promise I'm almost done. Actually, let's save that E key because I don't feel like looking for it again. Another thing that we could do with variables, if I click on one of these, and I'll show you how to do that on the actor actually, but if I clicked on one of these, the name for instance, right? And I have these options here on the right hand side. I have instance editable, expose on spawn, private, different categories. Um, let's talk about instance editable. What this is going to do is if I look in my level here and I take a look at my cube and I wanted to, actually, let's just do that. Let's just go for it. Let's go to our test object. Let's add a variable. Let's call it name. And let's move it to name, compile, save, QB. Let's go ahead and do instance editable. And another way to do this is if you click the little eyeball, you could do it there. So traditionally, I'll show you one way without it, one way with it. Without the instance editable there, if I click on it, I can't change its name. But if I go back to that test object and I click that eyeball to make it instance editable, this is the instance, and now I can edit the name, instance editable. So that's one thing that I would like to kind of point out is that is pretty commonly used, especially if you don't want to have to go back and dig through all your code to find something. So just keep that in mind in the future. And the other thing I want to go ahead and go over really quick is categories. So if you see here for variables, we have components, and all of this is kind of just weird information. So let's go ahead and go to currency collected. Let's go to player health. In our category, we can go ahead and click here and we can call this player stats. And when I press enter, I now have a new category here called player stats. This is mostly just for organization, but it's kind of important to have when you have super chaotic variables on an actor component or whatever it may be. So I'm just going to change a few of these to player stats just to kind of get a feel for what we're doing here. And then I can minimize that and just see what we're looking at here, right? Like I said, that's variables. All right, we're done with variables. I know it was a lot, but you can save this on your first person character. You can save this project just kind of as like a little bit of a cheat sheet. Hopefully you followed along and just kind of learned something new. Again, there's a wide variety of other variables out there that we'll be using in the future. And there's also different ways to change the type of variable, right? So like arrays and things like that. But we're not getting into that just yet. We're just going to stick with the basics. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one where we go over events and functions.